Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for taking the time to come on a Thursday afternoon. I'm a professor at the University of Pretoria, where I teach geoinformatics, and usually Thursday afternoons and Friday afternoons are like the death zone for student attendance. So it's quite, I appreciate you being here. This gentleman over there is standing next to what the readers of the journal Popular Mechanics in 1954 say a home computer will look like in 2004. It's always some old, heavy-set white guy. I'm not quite sure what the steering wheel is to be used for the home computer, but according to the article, this will be as common as the fridge or the iron in everyone's house. Don't know where the space will come from. It's going to use Fortran and teletype interface. This is from the journal Popular Science in 1925. So it looks as if lots of things were popular 100 years ago. Saying what a city would look like in 2025, so in 6 years' time. I like the idea of different levels for traffic. If there was one for taxis, that would be even better. And hopefully under the electric trains, as far down as you could go. The spiral escalators also interest me. It would be quite an experience going from the bottom all the way to the top. I always think when I see these things and reflections of the future, I always wonder about someone sitting in the audience teleported from 2069, no doubt a great year to be alive, looking at us and looking at the technology that we have and saying, wow, remember Rock Pro and tablets and iPods and iPhones, and these guys thought they were so cool. Right? So it's a different way of thinking about it. The moral of the story are there's perils in predicting the future, which is exactly what I do for a living. My main research interests rely on or are the geospatial analysis of crime. Does anyone recognize this building? Yes, well done. I was going to say, I'm glad no one recognizes it. So. This is Nkosi Mapula II prison in Pretoria. Part of my PhD about 10 years ago was getting data, geospatial data, or at least at that point it was data of the residential locations of all offenders that were currently incarcerated at the 5 correctional centers, the then 5 correctional centers across the municipality. So I spent a great deal of time in there. It didn't look like that. This is a bit of an upgrade. Trying to get data. After a year of trying to get permission from the Department of Correctional Services and 1,000 meetings and stamps and a vial of blood, I eventually got permission to get data. So I wandered in there with my flash drive, and the woman at the statistics office was like, yeah, I'm not giving this to you on the flash drive, I'm going to print it out. So I said, okay, and I waited. And she started printing, and it started printing in a dot matrix printer, right? Now, like that belongs in the Smithsonian. With the holes at the side, and the computer paper that folds. This is like 10 years ago, right? And this lady, she was very friendly, left the office quite often over the 6 to 7 hours that it took to print this stuff, leaving me alone with often 5 to 10 offenders that were cleaning and dusting and vacuuming, and she told me not to worry, it's unlikely that I'd be attacked because they're all in good behavior. So I wasn't attacked, but it was still pretty hairy. Okay, so eventually the data, I walked out there with these 2 telephone books of data, encoded it again, so it was a silly thing to not just give me the data how it was. And I was able to develop a profiling system at the neighborhood level in Tshwane that it's very spatially deterministic, but what it did is it described the level of risk per neighborhood on someone who lives in that neighborhood ending up in the criminal justice system in South Africa. So it was a little bit, as I said, spatially deterministic, but I like that kind of thing. Since then, I've kind of changed a little bit to examining crime incident locations. So that was mainly based on offender origins. And this is a map of the 1,143 police station boundaries in South Africa. And I don't have that much time to tell you about the kind of research I do in detail, but I thought of leaving you with one little nugget of information and a common misconception in South Africa that I've determined through a number of years doing research in crime. and that is that crime is not everywhere in South Africa. There is a misconception, especially if you travel overseas. South Africa is the crime capital, and South Africa is very violent, and of course, we know that is true. But one of the remarkable special things about crime in South Africa is that it is phenomenally concentrated and clustered. If you look at the whole country in the 9 provinces, just under 1 million of the 2 million crimes recorded in the last financial year were in Gauteng and the Western Cape, right? So that's 2 out of 9. If you look at the police precinct boundary, 7 police precincts, sorry, not 7, 10 police precincts, the top 10 police precincts in the country, that's 10 out of 1,143, that's less than 1%, collectively contains 7% of all crime in the country. 10 police precincts, 7% of all crime, and we're talking like in the millions, right? About 6 or 7 of those 10 are on the Cape Flats. And we know the recent military deployment there a few months ago, so there was some, obviously, validity in getting the military involved. If we break it down, however, let's narrow it down. So let's go from a police precinct boundary, let's look at the city. That's the city of Tshwane on the top right, and that's my desperate attempt at making a map. I have a PhD in geoinformatics, but I can't make a map for anything. So this was hastily done. That's Tshwane on the top right-hand side. I'm not supposed to look back. On the left-hand side, well, on the main screen, you have what's commonly known as the Pareto Principle, the 80-20 rule, okay? And in crime science, there's a lot of analysis that says 80% of crime occurs in 20% of possible locations, right? And this is a map that shows that on the axis on your left is the crime count, and that's represented by the bars. On the far right is the percentage of crime, and that's just property crime. I've done this for a number of other crimes. And that line is a hypothetical 80-20 line, the dotted horizontal line. If we look at something like shoplifting, which is the most spatially clustered in the city of Tshwane, it makes sense that almost all, well, at least 80% of shoplifting incidences occur in less than 10% of neighborhoods of Tshwane, because not all neighborhoods have a shopping center, right? But if you look at cash and transit heists, in the data we had, which was 6 years, there was 163 cash and transit heists. All 163 occurred in 17 neighborhoods, right? Which is representative of about 12% of neighborhoods contain all cash and transit heists. The most spatially diffuse property crime is house burglary, but even house burglary, 80% of house burglaries in Tshwane occur in only 35% of neighborhoods. So the other 20% of house burglary is occurring in 65% of neighborhoods. Again, showing the remarkable concentration. And when we did this with violent crime and sexual crime, it's the same pattern. But let's forget about the city level. Let's drill down to one of the top 10 most violent policing precincts in South Africa, and this is Khayelitsha. It's shown on the right-hand side there. There's about 255 odd small area layers, and this is a very simple graph showing robbery, rape, and assault over 8 years. On the y-axis, you have the percentage of small areas accounting for 75% of crime. And again, even in an exceptionally high crime area or crime policing precinct like Khayelitsha, which has got crime similar to a war zone, right? Crime is concentrated in a low number of SALs or suburbs. In this example there, and it's also remarkably temporally consistent, okay? There's not very much variation across years. So something like robbery, for example, is 15 to 20% of small areas account for 75% of all robbery. Assault is slightly more diffuse. But let's forget about the small area layer. If we drill down to the street segment, okay? And I've got a master's student, God bless her, Kathleen Godfrey, who's at the moment digitizing all the street nodes in Khayelitsha. We estimate it to be something like 40,000. Because in the kind of field that I'm doing, and my peers internationally, the suburb doesn't mean anything in terms of crime. It's now down to the street segment level and the street block level. And preliminary results that we're seeing in Khayelitsha is even at the street segment level, 80% of crime is occurring in 20% of street segments, right? So even in a high policing precinct, neighborhood, street segment, crime is exceptionally spatially concentrated, which is kind of good news. All right, so where do we go from here? How do we stop this? Even if crime is spatially clustered, it's still bad, right? And there's still a lot of it, and that is exactly true. I think that one of the solutions is possibly related to, the biggest solution is related to economic growth. Because economic growth means jobs and less unemployment. When you have less unemployment, you give people options, right? And at the moment, there's too many people in South Africa with no options, right? The problem is we think in South Africa, the economy is slow and stagnant and not going anywhere. The reality is globally, the economy is slumped. This is work done by a fantastic economist by the name of Raj Chetty. He's an economist at Harvard who gets GIS. rajchetty.com, if you're bored, please go to that website. This is the fading American dream. Percentage of children earning more than their parents by year of birth, right? So I was born in 1978. So I've got a 1 in 2 chance of pretty much equaling my parents' earnings in life. And it's declining at a steady rate. His research, Raj Chetty's research, and I think it's got a lot of validity in the South African context too, has traced 20 million Americans born from 1978 to 1983 and looked at how do you map people's pathways out of crime. One of the major findings of this longitudinal research is that you need upward mobility. So everyone comes out about crime and we need upward mobility in South Africa in general. I love this graph. This shows income gain from moving to a better neighborhood. So what his research has shown is that it's not that people move to a better neighborhood, it's the age at which the child moves to a better neighborhood. The longer it takes a child to move to a better neighborhood, as you can see in the graph over there, the less their outcomes are improved, right? So if children move to a better neighborhood aged over 20, their outcomes are pretty much going to be the same as if they always lived in a deprived neighborhood. So young people need to move upwards. Of course, a child can't get a mortgage and a loan, but overall, you need upward mobility. This is, I think, a very important point to make. So, how do we increase upward mobility? All right, well, I'm sure everyone here will give a different answer. I think there's 2 ways. You've got to move to opportunity. And this is where South Africa's apartheid spatial planning really screwed us over. And I'm also an urban geographer. Because the worst option, they're both spatial problems, is moving to opportunity. You've got to provide affordable housing in high opportunity areas. And those are areas that have access to resources and amenities. Alexandra is a high opportunity area. It may be uniformly poor, but it's in an area where transport costs are low and people have access to job opportunities and infrastructure and services, right? But you need affordable housing, and we've seen the issues in Alexandra last year related to that. Alternatively, or in addition, you need place-based investments. So if we can't provide affordable housing in high opportunity areas, maybe we can increase the upward mobility in low opportunity areas. And due, as I said, to our history and our spatial planning and the inequalities that are inherent in our spatial cities, most low opportunity areas are in townships. Think about a township like Khayelitsha. Khayelitsha's got a population the size of Cincinnati. The first shopping mall opened in Khayelitsha in 2005. Imagine Cincinnati without a shopping center, right? So you need investment in low opportunity areas. And this is where I think geospatial companies have a role to play and private sector has a role to play. People talk about the township economy, but unless you get this kind of people up in mobility and a movement and allow people a pathway to improve their outcomes across health and crime, I think the status quo is going to remain the same. Thank you very much for your time.